Take a moment for your body. Take a moment for your mind. Take a moment for your spirit. Take a moment to be well. Take a moment to be healthy. Take a moment when you pray. Take a moment for worship. Take a moment every day. Take a moment for your body. Take a moment for your mind. Take a moment for your spirit. Take a moment to be well. Take a moment to be happy. Take a moment when you pray. Take a moment for worship. Take a moment to show you care. Take a moment to show you care. Just to show how much you care. Yeah.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another evening of Healing Moments. This month, we are addressing the topic trauma. We know that the month of October, mental health is being addressed, and we want you to take the time to speak about trauma. Before we go any further, I would like to welcome those of us who are joining on Zoom and our guests on YouTube as well. We always encourage you to invite your friends, your neighbors, and the community at large to participate in these Healing Moment sessions with us. Now, we will go to Brother Trevor Blenman, who is going to speak about substituting praise for pain.
Thank you so much, Sister Laurie, and welcome to those of you who are with us on this program. Now, as Sister Lorianne said, this month we're going to be looking at trauma. I'm sure that the specialists, when they come, Sister Sherry and Dr. Dupree, will give you a more substantial definition for what trauma is. But for layman's term, it says trauma is a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. A deeply distressing or disturbing experience. And if we follow the definition, it means it's something that has affected almost all of us. I'm going to look at substituting praise for pain. And our text for contemplation comes from Psalms 92, verses 1 and 2, from the EB version of the Bible. And it says, I will praise you, Lord, with all my heart. I will tell all the miracles you have done. I will be happy because of you. God Most High, I will sing praises to your name. And we're reading from the book Energized, and the writer here is Debbie Bullock. Before I share with you what she writes, let us pray. Heavenly Father, we are thankful that you have given us this opportunity to share with each other this particular program, which shows your love, Healing Moments. You have not made this world and left it by itself. You continue to be a personable God, and through individuals, you've sought to show us the way that we should live. As we go through this program this evening, we pray that will be a help to all those who listen and to those of us who participate. For Christ's sake, amen. Debbie Bullock writes, sometimes it seems as if the whole world comes crashing down in on you all at once. My husband's back problem threatened to leave him a helpless cripple. My father-in-law died. Benji, our firstborn, hemorrhaged and was facing surgery. Then it happened. A bloke forced me to the side of the road. I remember bending down to fit the jack, and the next thing I knew, I was picking myself up from down the embankment. Someone had sideswept my car. Not until a couple hours later did the pain hit. Excruciating, nauseating pain shot down from my shoulder through my body, leaving my head throbbing. Probably just a pull muscle, the doctor said. A couple of weeks later, I became incapacitated with pain spasms so severe that I lose consciousness. I was hospitalized for a month, then bedridden at home for 6 months with pain so intense I almost existed on morphine. Later, a doctor in Edmonton said he'd never seen such a severe reversal whiplash and exclaimed, "You should have been killed instantly." I owe my life to being in peak physical condition. My body simply bent instead of breaking. But as a result of the stress on my system, I had come down with fibromyalgia, a disease that now forces me to live in constant pain. Wow. At first, I fought it, became depressed, and felt a burden to my family. My negative attitude put a chasm between me and God. But as I began to read and pray, I came to realize that I was responsible for my own health and happiness. I needed to accept my condition and live life within my limits. My worth was not tied to my works. I believe God is in the process of healing me, she writes. I may never be free of pain. The miracle is that he has given me an attitude of praise that supersedes the pain. Let me read that again. The miracle is that he is giving me an attitude of praise that supersedes the pain. When I begin to count my blessings, when I focus on praising him, I don't notice the pain. And then she asks, what are you thankful for today? How can you live in an attitude of praise all day, despite the trauma in your life? Here ends our devotional. Substituting praise for pain. Lorianne.
Thank you very much, Brother Glenda. And we move on to the next panelist, our very own Sister Sherry Sobers. Took somewhat of a back seat for the last 2 sessions to allow our guest speakers to present. Mrs. Sobers will be speaking on what is trauma and the different types of trauma. Sister Sherry, welcome.
Thank you so much, Lorianne, and good evening, everyone. Yes, the back seat felt great because I was able to enjoy the sessions, and we really did have some interesting, enlightening sessions over the last 2-3 weeks. But we are in a new month, and as was stated before, October is Mental Health Month. Specifically, October 10th is Mental Health Awareness Day. So you can keep that in mind when you go about your duties and your usual stuff on the 10th of October. So this month, we are in a new topic, and it may be a little heavy, but we'll get through it. We're looking at trauma, and specifically emotional and psychological trauma. The reality is that in life, bad things happen. It can take a while to get over it. It may take a while to get over the pain and feel safe again, but bad things happen. And I believe that everyone in the world can agree with me that since March 2020, this place has not been the same. And we don't think it will ever be the same because we had the entrance of COVID-19. That in itself is a traumatic experience. Now, few people can say that they have gone through life without encountering some kind of trauma. The difference is, based on our past experiences, how we are able to deal with them. So let's go first. You know, I love to give you the definitions. And this first session is usually one where I give the definitions. Brother Trevor gave a pretty good one just now. And just to build on that, because all that he said was correct. Now, when we go through stressful, frightening, or distressing events, those are sometimes called trauma. When we talk about emotional and psychological trauma, we mean 2 things. First, situations or events that we find traumatic. And secondly, how we are affected by our experiences. Traumatic events can happen at any age, and they can last either one time or they can be long lasting. Everyone has a different reaction to trauma. We're going to talk about that also later. And you might notice that the effects may go quickly or they may be long lasting. When we talk about how an individual is affected by trauma, we are talking about a person's emotional response. And when we talk about emotions, we know what we're talking about: the anger, the sadness, the pain, the hurt, all of those things to whatever terrible event. And a terrible event can be an accident, it can be rape, it can be sexual assault, it can be natural disaster. All of those describe traumatic events. Now, immediately after the event, shock and denial are typical things that we may feel, but longer term reactions can include unpredictable emotions. We can have flashbacks. A scent can bring us back to that place, that traumatic event. A place can trigger our minds. We can have strained relationships. And even we can even have physical symptoms like headaches, nausea, stomach pains, all of those things. Now, while those feelings are normal, the difference about it is that people have difficulty moving on. And that's where it becomes traumatic, because in life, we get sick. In life, things happen that cause us to feel out of sorts. And what makes it different is if we can't seem to get over that hurdle. In life, we have hardships. We have things that happen to us. But the traumatic events tend to be sudden and unpredictable. Most importantly, they involve a serious threat to life, like bodily harm or even death. And the person feels beyond being able to control whatever is happening around them. There is that sense of not being able to control the event, control the circumstance that does not sit well with the person. Most importantly, events are traumatic to the degree that they undermine a person's sense of safety in the world. And that is very important. When we do not feel safe, we are not able to deal with whatever is happening. Trauma is subjective. And when I say subjective, even though it is felt at all developmental stages in life, what makes it different with children is that if they're not able to manage, if they're not able to deal with whatever traumatic event that has gone on, the results go beyond adulthood, beyond adolescence, beyond adulthood, and can go on to affect them for the rest of their lives. Parental loss in childhood, for example, a car accident, physical violence, sexual assault, military combat experience. We know, like PTSD, what soldiers deal with when they go to war and they come back. All of those things are examples of traumatic events. So let's look at the different types of trauma. As I said before, you can have acute trauma, which is a one-time event. It is short. It can be something like a car crash, physical assault, but or the sudden death of a loved one happening once. But then we may have chronic trauma that can arise from harmful events that are repeated. If, for example, a child has been sexually assaulted by a family member living in the household repeatedly from the ages of 7, 8, 9, and it continues without it being addressed, that is chronic trauma. Complex trauma can arise from, again, repeated and multiple traumatic events. So take this child who's been sexually abused, then they get into a car accident. That is complex. It builds on one type of trauma to the next. And when those things happen, that person can have a sense of hypervigilance, that they're constantly on edge. They obviously sleep patterns are disrupted, eating patterns are disrupted. Another type is secondary or vicarious trauma that can arise from exposure to people suffering. Now, you may not have directly dealt with it, but it usually strikes in those helping professions that respond to injury and respond to issues and car accidents. For example, physicians, doctors, first responders, and things like that. And the last one, adverse childhood experiences. Cover a wide, and we're going to talk about this in another session, that can arise from a wide range of different situations that happen directly to children. Now, the effects of unresolved trauma can be devastating. It can affect our habits and our outlook on life. It can lead to addictions, poor decision-making. It can take a toll on our family life, on our interpersonal relationships. It can trigger real physical pain, symptoms, and disease. And it can lead to a serious set of self-destructive habits. So, as we delve into the topic of trauma this month, I want to leave this quote with you. Trauma sticks with you. Even after the terrible moment has passed, it becomes a life sentence for a crime you didn't commit. Think about it. Have a good evening, and I'll see you later as we discuss this some more.
Take a moment for your body. Take a moment for your mind. Take a moment for your spirit. Take a moment to be well. Take a moment to be healthy. Take a moment when you pray. Take a moment for worship. Take a moment every day. Take a moment for your body. Take a moment for your mind. Take a moment for your spirit. Take a moment to be well. Take a moment to be happy. Take a moment when you pray. Take a moment for worship. Take a moment to show you care. Take a moment to show you care. Just to show how much you care. Yeah.
Welcome back, everybody. Sister Sherry has already given us a taste of what to expect from our month-long discussion on trauma. And I know just from some of the things that she has mentioned about the types of trauma, like chronic trauma and the duration of time and all of these different things, a lot of us are pondering on a lot of things. And I know we already have some questions in our mind. So before you forget those questions, you can just type them in the chat on Zoom or on YouTube, and so that you don't forget them. But in the meantime, we're going to introduce our next panelist, our very own as well, medical specialist, Dr. Cornfield UP, who will be speaking about the cells involved in trauma.
Good evening, everyone, and it's good to be back on another day, on another month, another Thursday. Thank you for joining us. I listened to Sister Sherry with great interest because some of the things that she was mentioning are directly related or very, very similar to what happens in our physical body. And she was talking about psychological and physical things. But even down at the level of our cells, we can have trauma as well. And the process is quite similar to what happens in psychological trauma. You have to forgive my list today. The moon is either going up or going down. I'm not sure what's happening. So we have physical types of injury that can happen to the cell. I don't have the image right now, but for those of you who were around when we talk about cell communication, you remember that we talked about the cell membrane and the nuclear membrane and how this membrane is fluid and has transmembrane proteins and pumps that can allow certain substances to enter the cell or to leave the cell. And we talked about its protective function around the cell. So I'm going to now talk about different types of trauma that the cell can suffer. And as you know, our bodies are made up of cells. And so if our cells are injured, then our organs and our tissues are also going to suffer. So we have physical agents like mechanical trauma, like a crush injury. Somebody knocks you with a rock, something crushes the tissue. We have mechanical trauma. We have heat and cold, temperature changes, atmospheric pressure can also damage our cells. We have radiation from things like X-rays, ultraviolet rays from the sun, our microwaves, even our cell phones produce radiation that can injure our cells. And then we have electricity, such as an electric shock. Then we have chemical agents. We have poisons, like the ones that people take when they want to harm themselves. They're very well versed in the knowledge, knowing that if you take certain poisons like weedicides and pesticides, that they will kill. They have to first kill the cell, and then they will kill the individual. So we have poisons like paraquat, cyanide, arsenic. We have other industrial pollutants like asbestos. We have carbon monoxide, for example. And then we have drugs like medications that can be toxic. And all medications, as a matter of fact, have some kind of effect on the cell, changes something about the cell, and that's how they're able to function. And of course, we have the other illegal drugs like cocaine. We have drugs like marijuana, for example, that can damage the cell. Then one of the most common types of injuries that cells can suffer is low oxygen. And for those of you who are very knowledgeable about COVID-19, one of the effects of COVID-19 on the lungs is that it causes the oxygen saturation to go very, very low. And that is how it tends to kill. So you have oxygen. So low oxygen can cause injury to the cell, but as well, too much oxygen can cause injury to the cell. Then we have a lack of blood supply. So if you have a tourniquet that's on too tight, clothing that's on too tight, something that ties up your limb, a cut that causes hemorrhaging so that there is loss of blood to another organ or tissue, those can damage the cells. And then we have infections like viruses, bacteria, parasites, fungi. We also have immunological agents like autoimmune diseases. Sometimes you may have genetic problems, chromosomal abnormalities, like you will see people who have Down syndrome, for example. They have an abnormality in chromosome 21 that causes some of their cells to maldevelop. And then, of course, we have nutritional deficiencies like vitamin deficiencies or nutritional excesses like in obesity. So what happens when a cell becomes injured or traumatized? It all depends on, as Sister Sherry mentioned, the severity of the injury and the chronicity of the injury. So you may have a mild injury that can cause just transient damage to the cell, and the cell function can be restored. Sometimes the injuries to the cell membrane, and it causes water to enter the cell may swell, but eventually it may lose that water and start to function again. However, if you have repeated injury or chronic injury, even though it is mild, eventually it may injure the cells so much that it causes it to become pathological, and the cell may die or cause the cells around it to die or to malfunction. If the injury is major, even if it happens once, it can be so severe that it makes the cell reach the point of no return, and so the cell dies. So for example, in a heart attack, a vessel that carries blood to a certain section of the heart muscle itself becomes blocked by plaque or by a clot forming or by a plaque breaking or bleeding into a plaque that is inside the vessel. The vessel gets blocked. There is no blood flow to that section of the heart. And remember, we said that loss of blood flow or low blood flow injures cells. And so if that area of the heart does not get its blood supply restored within minutes, that part of the heart actually dies. And that's what we call a myocardial infarction or a heart attack. It doesn't mean that the person is going to die, but that part of the heart will die and will never function adequately again. And that person will always be in danger of having an abnormal heart rhythm, and so they will die. There are actually injuries that cause cells to become so injured and not just die like rot. They actually will just commit suicide and get out of the way. Now, how do our cells adapt? I'm sure Sister Sherry is also going to talk about adaptability to trauma. How do our cells adapt? Well, there are various ways our cells can adapt to injury. For example, if there is an injury at one level of a limb, for example, the part of the limb that is beyond that injury may get smaller. That's what we call atrophy. Or if somebody has a stroke, I'm sure that is a much more common example. A stroke that affects the right side of the body, and the person is no longer able to use the right arm or the right leg, the leg gets smaller. And that's an adaptation of the cells to be able to survive, because if they get smaller, then they will have a lower requirement for nourishment, and so they will be able to survive. Or sometimes repeated injury can cause the cells to get bigger. So say that you're always lifting weights. You're putting additional strain on the cells, so the muscles are going to get bigger so that they will be able to continue to function as you continue to increase those weights that you are lifting. If they do not get larger, then you will not be able to lift larger weights. Or sometimes the body just increases the number of cells in response to the injury, so that you have more cells able to perform that function that organ is performing. And then sometimes, I'm going to give you an example of injury. If you have eczema and you're always scratching a particular part of your arm or your leg, you will notice that the skin starts getting thicker. That's because it's building up a level of an increased number of cells in the epithelium or the epidermis, that's the top layer of your skin. so that it will be able to stand all of that extreme stress that you're putting on it. So that's an example of hyperplasia of the cell layer. And sometimes the cells just change form. So for example, in our respiratory tract, which is our nasal passages, our windpipe, our bronchi that take air to our lungs, we have nice long cells with fine cilia at the ends that are able to trap debris that may be in the air that we breathe. And that is the function of those cilia. In smokers, for example, who are continually damaging their airways by taking in poisons and smoke, what happens eventually is that the cells just change form and they become a totally different type of epithelium so that they can protect themselves from the injury. However, sometimes that backfires because while the epithelium changes to protect itself, it can also end up becoming cancerous. So repeated trauma can cause cells to increase so that they can withstand the trauma, but at the same time, it can cause them to change and become cancerous and dangerous to the organism. So to summarize, cells can be injured by physical means, by chemical means, by temperature, and they are able to adapt depending on the level of the trauma or the chronicity of the trauma. And cells are able to cells will either die in response to injury or they will adapt to the stress over time so that the body will still be able to function. So we have a wonderful body made by a wonderful God that's able to, if we didn't have those mechanisms in us, we would all be dead already because any little thing would kill us and kill ourselves. But God has given us that mechanism so that we can adapt to situations, either by, as we said, atrophy, hypertrophy, getting bigger, making more cells, or by changing form so that we can withstand the trauma. So as we go week by week, you'll be able to see how there are parallels between what happens in our bodies or in our brains psychologically and what happens in our brains physically. Have a good evening, or if you have any questions, I'll be here.
Take a moment for your body. Take a moment for your mind. Take a moment for your spirit. Take a moment to be well. Take a moment to be healthy. Take a moment when you pray. Take a moment for worship. Take a moment every day. Take a moment for your body. Take a moment for your mind. Take a moment for your spirit. Take a moment to be well. Take a moment to be happy. Take a moment when you pray. Take a moment for worship. Take a moment to show you care. Take a moment to show you care. Just to show how much you care. Yeah.
And we are back. Dr. Dupi also gave us a head full of information, and a lot of us are processing it right now. But there are those of us who already have questions. As always, we always welcome, invite questions here on Healing Moments, because this is an interactive session, and we want our participants to learn and grow and heal from this as much as possible. So the first question we have there, Dr. Dupuy, this one is for you. Can trauma to the head cause a tumor? This in relation to trauma.
Some studies have been carried out in a few places. Brain tumors are not very common tumors, and head trauma is fairly common. The jury is still out on whether head trauma can cause tumor. A few studies have shown that there is a small increase in incidence of brain tumor for people who have had head injuries. But I don't think the evidence is very strong. I know that bone trauma in young children can result in bone tumors. And yeah, there are certain, what would I say? I'm trying to get the word. There are incidences of increase of certain type of tumors to trauma in certain regions of the body. But I don't think the evidence is strong with respect to head trauma and brain tumors. I suspect I know why you're asking, Sister Augustine. I'm not sure that it is positive.
Okay, Dr. Dupuy, thank you very much. As you have mentioned, children, I also wonder situations such as COVID pandemic, where a lot of children are going through a lot of things. It's not even just being locked into the home. Some of them are going through different emotional and physical situations. Can these situations that these children are going, although it's not something that we would say is like an accident or a death, can it be considered a traumatic event for children?
Yes, I'm sure. Stress of any type is traumatic. So it may be physical or psychological, but stress is a serious causative factor in most illnesses that you can think of. In any illness that's developing, if there is stress in addition, that illness develops even quicker or more seriously. So yes, there is evidence that stress can cause any number of diseases.
Just to add as well, Lori, and I do plan in one of the subsequent sessions to speak about childhood trauma and its physiological and psychological effects. Because remember, I said there are two things I want you to remember when it comes to trauma. One is threat to safety. The other, and with children, then whatever may threaten their safety. And that's where the subjectivity of it comes. So what an 8-year-old may be able to deal with, a 3-year-old may not be able to deal with, and it may threaten their safety more. So remember that when it comes to children and the trauma. So yes, all that's going on now is very traumatic, especially to children. We will not be able to see the effects fully, maybe in the next 5 or so years, but you have to, when you think about trauma, especially in children, you look at the subjectivity of it, and once it is a threat to safety. I actually had a question for Dr. Dupuy. It's kind of out of left wing. You know, when you talk about the heart attacks, and a part of the heart being damaged forever, is that well, not forever. We understand what that means.
Forever. Forever is as long as it's lasts.
Is that why sometimes person have what is known as a bypass surgery?
Okay, a bypass surgery is not going to reverse the injury that has already happened, but a bypass is to correct the vascular problem that was there, which is the vessels, they get hard, they get blocked by plaque. So the doctors, they harvest veins from somewhere else, like a limb, for example, and they graft that area of the heart so that the blood bypasses the coronary artery that it normally should go through and goes through that new vessel. So that they call it a bypass graft. So you could have a single vessel graft or a 3-vessel graft, and hopefully it will keep on functioning because it doesn't have to go through the native vessel.
Okay, thanks.
Right.
Yes, we have a comment here from Leanne Sobers, who says, a sudden change in one's life or environment can be very traumatic. Once there is an imbalance, it can take us for a spin. Example, also, or sudden invasion of one's space. That's very interesting because yes, it's very interesting because at this point where we are going through this pandemic, and a lot of people are emphasizing the
Physical distancing.
physical distancing, but at the same time, there is a certain demand on people to do certain things that they might feel like it could be an invasion of their personal space, such as telling people that they have to be vaccinated. And even that, I should ask Sister Sherry and Dr. Duke, even demanding mandatory vaccination for some people, where I am in support that people be as safe as possible, and I do believe that vaccination should a personal decision. Even something like that, do you think that demanding mandatory vaccination for people can cause some people to be traumatized?
Yes, Louis, that can cause trauma, but that's a highly political topic that you are introducing here, and so I wouldn't like to comment further on it. But yes, I believe that it can cause personal trauma if one is not comfortable with getting vaccinated or vaccinated within a pandemic, or has issues with the safety of the vaccine.
Laurie, I'd just like to add as well, going back, not touching the vaccination thing at all, but going back to what you spoke about earlier with children and the new protocols with people in general. Now, for example, there are some children who are thriving right now in an online environment because they love that. Then there are others who are not thriving at all because of their personality. They need to be able to be around individuals. That is one example of how much it can, what we're going through now, can traumatize a person. Think of a person who's a hugger.
Mm-hmm.
Now told, I can't, well, not that you can't, but it almost feels strange to have to restrain yourself. That is traumatic. You know, there are so many other examples we can think about, but those were the two that came to my mind in terms of the child who is able to thrive in online versus the one who cannot get done. not because the child is lacking in any way in terms of intelligence, but because this child thrives around persons. And then the child or the adult, who is a hugger, who is the touchy-feely person, and now not able, having to remind him or herself, be careful because of what we're dealing with.
All right. And while we're on that, remember your friends can also spread COVID or have asymptomatic COVID. So no matter how close you are to the person or how long you haven't seen the person, always remember to avoid hugging.
How inclined you might feel to hug them after not seeing them for so long.
Yes, yes, yes.
That is true. So you hug yourself.
Yes, please. I saw a question. You want me to take it, Louis?
Yes, go ahead. You can go
If
ahead.
a person loses a limb, they try to learn how to compensate for the new way of movement with therapy. What help is there for a person who loses full functionality of a breast or penis through an accident? For these people, what I would suggest is that they get, what do we call it? Oh, I'm forgetting the name. A prosthesis. A prosthesis.
Implant.
A prosthetic breast, or a breast implant, or a prosthetic penis, just for the feeling that it is still there. I'm not sure about the level of function they will achieve. Of course, you can't breastfeed with a prosthetic breast, that is quite clear. But that is the best answer. Prosthesis.
Well, I mean, in a sense,
that comes under loss, like what we were talking about last month. No, the month before the last.
The month before, yes.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and Deanne mentions phantom
feeling.
Phantom feeling.
Yeah.
You get there's something called phantom limb, where when a limb is amputated, the person can still feel the limb as if it's been there. I remember somebody sort of making a half joke, but asking somebody to go down to the mortuary where the legs were being stored and scratch under their foot, because they were still feeling as if they had an itch under their foot. So can you go down to the mortuary and scratch under my foot for me?
Wow.
And so yeah, phantom limbs are a real thing, and phantom pain is actually can be quite severe.
I have another question here. An elder in my church tried to have sex with my daughter. She is no longer interested in church. The experience was a big letdown for her, as he was very well respected. How can we help her back to normalcy? Sherry?
As a long therapy session.
So in a situation like that, it is always best to go back from the beginning and then push forward. Go back to the situation, because obviously this is an unresolved traumatic event. And it involves a lot of therapy, and it involves a lot of taking time with this child. It involves a professional, a mental health professional intervention. Yes, it also involves prayer and the spiritual aspect, but there are some aspects that a mental health professional would be able to deal with as well, because there may be some other issue that the child, who probably is now an adult, may have also some other behaviors that would have come subsequent to the assault. So sometimes things happen and we're not able to piece them together because we don't go to the root. So as I said from the beginning, start at the root. And then prayerfully bring the person from that experience. Because I'll tell you this, in children especially, whenever, and in adults as well, when you are triggered by, or when a traumatic event happens and then something triggers that, we talked about smells, we talked about places, we talked about people, that trigger takes you right back to whenever it happens. So your memory kind of just goes right back. So if that happened 5 years ago, it takes you back 5 years. If it happened 10 years ago, it takes you back 10 years. If it happened 20 years ago, whatever time, especially if it was not resolved, you go right back there. So go right back there and move forward.
I would like to suggest also that part of this resolution would be dealing with the elder as well. That young child should see the church taking responsibility in order to assist her. Investigation should be done. I remember Pastor Hall being asked this question before, and he said it should be dealt with. He said he would forgive the elder, but he would still lock him up.
Very much so. He needs to understand the consequences of actions, and not just consequences, but how the ramifications of it, not just consequences, but ramifications, and dealing with God forgives, yes, but we also have to deal with the results of our actions.
Consequences.
It's consequences, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, you forgive him because you forgive. It still has to be dealt with. And like I said, the trauma that child is going through, if she sees the church standing up to the situation, because she said he's well respected. So you get from that phrase, well respected, that she figures that nothing is going to be done about him. So hence she cannot trust the church nor the people in the church. So the church has the responsibility to represent her.
It is very much a matter of trust, and restoring that trust, restoring her faith in the church, in God, in spirituality in general.
I'd like to, this is not related to the question, but I was very impressed by the devotional reading, especially the part where it said that the person, after going through that traumatic event where the car swiped them and they ended up in the ditch, and the person ended up with fibromyalgia. I'm looking for somebody. Fibromyalgia is a very difficult disease to understand, and some people do not even believe that it exists. Some people believe that it's all in your mind. But these are people who suffer from chronic pain, and it's like their muscles have memory. So their muscles never forget the pain. So they live with chronic pain, and these are people who are in danger of becoming addicted to pain-killing drugs. And they need more than one type of therapy, not just physical therapy, but they need psychological therapy as well, because it's like the pain becomes the main thing in their life. And what the devotional talked about, substituting praise for pain, is a very interesting technique, because I personally recall, and I was recalling this morning, that after my mother died, I had a pain in my neck that wouldn't go away for months. And there were times when I would be on my way home from work at the end of the day, and I would literally be crying while I drive because there was nothing that was taking the pain away. And I remember calling a friend one day when I was on the way home, and I said, "Sing to me." And he just started to sing. I said, "Just sing." And he just sang until I got home. And I actually decided that every time the pain came, I would either sing or laugh. And it actually helped. The pain has gone away now, but to deal with chronic pain is not easy. And the technique of substituting praise for pain is something that really works.
Thank you very much, Dr. As Sister Sherry and Brother Blennerman was speaking about the situation, the way that situation should be handled in the case that was just mentioned, a question came to mind. As Sister Sherry said, sometimes it could be 10, 20, 15 years later that memory can come back. But in a situation where there is no accountability from the standpoint of the person who was the aggressor, how can that person get over it? Because there could be a situation where the person would just decide that that person was never held accountable, that person never wanted to admit that they did me wrong or anything like that. So I am not ever stepping foot back into the church again. How can that be resolved?
I think that's why Elder Blenman said that the elder should be held responsible. And yes, I believe that the person should be taken to court. But if that wasn't resolved, then that person is just going to need serious therapy. And I don't think it's ever too late to try to heal. But we have to remember that those things are serious and they can really affect people for life. And as much as we are forgiving and we want to be children and we want to be like Jesus, we have to remember that sometimes Jesus took some ropes and beat the people. So if we have to do something like that, we should.
Just to add to and support what Brother Blenman said about taking a legal standpoint, maybe for that individual, it may bring to them a sense of comfort if that person is dealt with in terms of the law. I can only say if, because everyone reacts different and we are looking at possibilities. So that could be a way that the person may find as if their voice is being heard and they have been, as much as that person is respected, the person has taken account for what they have done through the legal process. That is one way. Sometimes individuals determine that, okay, well, this is not going how I wanted it to go, and I am just gonna go the other way. I'm gonna find a different church. I'm going to, they go off track and then something happens in their life. And because, we leave God, God never leaves us. He's promised that. He said he'll never leave us nor forsake us. Or there may be the person with the personality that will determine, I want to get my life in a certain direction. I have goals. So therefore, I'm going to push through the pain. It may not be praise. They may not get to the point where they're praising, but they're just pushing in spite of the pain. So there are a number of factors that can determine why a person may take road A to road B to road C to road D.
Okay, so we have one last question. Deanne, thank you very much for joining us. We're seeing that you have to leave us. Bernadette in the comments said that she knows of an incident where a priest was held accountable 19 years later. So there's hope that there are people who, if that is one way that it can help them take steps towards getting over their trauma or dealing with their trauma, then there's still hope. So we have one last question. I've been praying to God for a spouse, but I just can't seem to get a suitable person. I've had so many failed relationships as these guys all seem to want sex before marriage, now in my 40s, and feel so alone and cast away from keeping my virginity. Is that a case of trauma, Sister Sherry?
I don't know if I could fully define that as trauma. I can define it as someone who has been searching and maybe there is something in their life that this scenario did not fully explain. There are other reasons why this situation might happen. It is repeated, and then sometimes we pray to God and we know that He answers prayers, but sometimes the way God answers our prayer may not be how we want it to be. And the thing that is right in front of us, we're not seeing because we're not seeing what we want to see. So it is a situation where, when it comes to God, time is nothing. Time stands still. But for us as human beings, we look at and for women, and I can assume that this person is a female. I can assume that, especially if it is a situation where the person is thinking about their biological clock, they may want to have children and they understand how those things go. So it is unfortunate that they may see their life wrapped up in becoming the wife of someone, but then they may be missing all the other good qualities of them that they are not highlighting. They may be very good in their career. They may be very good person in terms of helping others. They may have a very strong connection with their family. So they may need to just look at what is the other parts of them and not just focus fully on that aspect, which is important, but it is just part of who they are.
Yeah, so maybe in a sense like that could be traumatic because they might feel that all their attempts are just discouraging.
Yeah.
But here we have one final comment before we end. It's so ironic because watching TV shows such as Marriage at First Sight may mean you need to take a chance and meet and marry just like this. In the Bible, most of the marriages were at first sight. So maybe there's something to that there. Why it was done in such a case. Maybe at another time we can discuss why these things took place like that. We have Dr. GP. Courtship is so boring. So thank you all for joining us this evening for our introduction to trauma. Next week, we will be delving deeper into the topic of trauma. And Sister Sherry, you want to give us a hint as to what we might be addressing next week?
You know I don't give hints, Sister Lori. All I'll say is come. Friend, bring a friend. It will be traumatic.
Thank you so much. So as usual, thank you all for joining us on Zoom and on YouTube. Remember, as Sister Sherry says, bring a friend, invite your friends, your families, your neighbors, and the community next week. Share the link.
Take a moment for your body. Take a moment for your mind. Take a moment for your spirit. Take a moment to be well. Take a moment to be healthy. Take a moment when you pray. Take a moment for worship. Take a moment every day. Take a moment for your body. Take a moment for your mind. Take a moment for your spirit. Take a moment to be well. Take a moment to be happy. Take a moment when you pray. Take a moment for worship. Take a moment to show you care. Take a moment to show you care. Just to show how much you care.